I live in a perpetual state of change currently, and that's been happening for about 9 months. Not intentionally, I didn't have any, I do have wanderlust, I think, but I also don't live out of a van or anything. I've been staying with people I care about in different places.
It's Friday morning. I'm at Arrowrock Dam and it's gorgeous. Today is also my first day that I am not meeting up with anybody. I'm gonna try and find myself a good breakfast and a good hotel room where I can do some video editing. I'm kind of excited to just sit in a room and take like 3 showers and eat real food.
Ooh, can't believe it. Off-road Nighthawk. Got there, ready to settle down, ready to do some editing. Took a shower, and then noticed there was a bug on the bed. So I actually looked under the covers, and I saw another one, and it was a bed bug. There are literally no other rooms available in this town, so now I am without a place to sleep for the night. I'm just gonna get some dinner, and then I'm gonna call around, and maybe there will be a cancellation somewhere.
Should we all go around and say our favorite memories of Lizzie?
Was everyone's name was Pat with me.
Never ever patience. Sometimes karma is easy, sometimes karma is enough to cry.
Are you guys still here?
Just dreaming of aquatic things on this hot day.
I don't want to get on. Don't give me a
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just torturing you guys now. I've gotten so many pictures.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So Jordan, I met you yesterday for the first time, and we're in Montana. We're in Missoula right now, But you don't live here. You're, in your words, you're kind of bouncing around. Is that what you would say?
Oh, that's a fine way to put it.
Yeah. Could you just talk a little bit about where you grew up and what that was like?
Yeah. I grew up in a town called Webster Groves, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, and I wasn't supposed to grow up there.
What's that mean?
My parents had picked out a house in Seattle, which is where you live, and in their words, California moved in and they couldn't afford the house anymore. So I didn't grow up in Seattle, I grew up in St. Louis. I didn't realize until I moved back to Chicago in 2018 that I grew up in the South. I always thought I grew up in the Midwest, which I think is equally true, but St. Louis is subdivided by the Mason-Dixon line, and so you have two distinct forms of like white self-absorption, where you have the northern savior complex of being like, we're not as bad as the South, and then you also have just like the South of being nostalgic and being like, it wasn't that bad. Growing up in Webster Groves was odd because my parents thought that they were moving into a college town that was progressive and open-minded, and it turned out that it was an incredibly racist, incredibly corrupt town where cops would end up in hot tubs with high school girls when they were going to like bust up parties, and my dad's friends from the north side would try to come hang out at our house, and they'd take the bus in, they'd get to the border of our neighborhood, get picked up by the cops, or they'd get a couple blocks into the neighborhood, get driven out to the border and have to call on a payphone as black men to be able to have my dad pick him up to prove that they knew someone. I didn't know all this shit growing up there.
Yeah, how old were you when a lot of this was taking place?
The whole time I lived there. We were the only family of anyone I knew that had any friends who were gay. I was the most Jewish kid at my whole school. I was half Jewish, and they would take me out of class to go to other classrooms to spell Jewish words for teachers who were making like inclusive holiday crossword puzzles because it was pre-internet. It was a weird place to grow up.
It sounds like you and your family didn't necessarily, you didn't feel totally in the center of that culture.
We definitely didn't fit in, but we could blend in.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, we were totally physically safe. We were totally free of the discrimination that our friends who weren't white experienced coming into our neighborhood. There's a lot that I really enjoyed about growing up there. We roamed the neighborhood as kids. The one really special thing about growing up in this particular house was when I was a baby, my parents were going to Florida for a vacation, and they were down at the fence in our backyard and saw our neighbors, and they're like, hey neighbors, just a heads up, if you could just keep an eye on the house while we're gone, we're going to Florida. And the neighbors were like, sorry, we can't, we're going to Florida too. They're like, where are you going? And it turns out they were staying like half a mile away from each other in this part of Florida that was totally underdeveloped. There's no reason that they should have been going to the same spot. So our families ended up becoming close friends, and those two boys became my brothers, and they taught me how to pee in a toilet, and we used to, all this stuff. Because I'm only kid, so.
Same.
Cool. Yeah, it was really nice to grow up with some sense of having siblings. But I would just walk in their house whenever I wanted and eat their peanut butter, because they had Jif and my parents had the kind of natural peanut butter that's separated. I
preferred the Jif.
Oh yeah, I gained a lot of weight in 6th grade because they had white bread and
and unnatural peanut butter. I was the only kid who had a tofu birthday cake, which...
You could get tofu birthday cakes?
No, my mom made it. It was totally disgusting.
It wasn't a kosher thing, right?
No, that's the thing. My mom was an ex-Jew. I just still was the most Jewish kid.
Yeah.
She totally... I forget. She, eschewed her Jewish roots. Even when I went back, I like visited my grandma a couple years ago, and I was like, I really want to bond with her about our heritage. I grew up with really no sense of familial culture based on nationality or ethnicity. It was just like, I grew up with my dad, wanted nothing to do with Catholicism. We have the most ambiguous history of Alsace region white people that are French, German, or British based on the border, but I got no part of any, I didn't grow up with any like German heritage or anything. Like my mom, I only found out recently that my mom is like Slavic. But when I visited my grandma, I was like, Grandma, I want to go to the temple with you. I want to go to synagogue. Because she had talked about going there and hanging out with friends. And she's like, Jordan, you need to she does not sound like this, by the way. If she heard this, she would be like, this is not how I sound. She's like, Jordan, you need to understand, we are not Jewish religiously, we're Jewish socially.
Well, I'm sure that there's a lot more that you could say about growing up in Missouri, but could you talk a little bit, and this question might be kind of hard, but you can approach it however you want. I'm asking this question to everyone, and I'm realizing that maybe it's a little bit of a flawed question. But the question is, where do you live now, and what's that like?
Yeah. I live in a perpetual state of change currently, and that's been happening for about 9 months. Not intentionally, I didn't have any, I do have wanderlust, I think. But I also don't live out of a van or anything. I've been staying with people I care about in different places. And in the last 9 months, I've been traversing between Chicago, Columbia, Missouri, Evergreen, Colorado, Missoula, and Detroit. And that's been my trajectory so far. With stops in San Francisco and in Portland.
It's a pretty big area to cover.
Yeah.
Why those places?
When winter was descending during the pandemic, my partner at the time was leaving Chicago, and I realized I couldn't stay in Chicago so isolated. And so I had to leave. I went to stay with my family because I thought it would be a really nice return to get to hang out with these people I don't usually get to see for a long period of time. But I thought about staying in my apartment in Chicago, but my landlord had been doing construction on the apartment above me starting at 6 a.m. for 2.5 months. And there was no signs that it was stopping. He kept lying and extending it. And so...
This was in the middle of COVID.
In the middle of COVID, working entirely from home with he was redoing the floors and the walls. Like all of the walls, like down to studs. So that was... I couldn't pay that dude any more money. But my partner at the time was staying in San Francisco, so I was visiting there. She didn't drive, so we drove her there to drop her off and celebrate her birthday. And I ended up getting invited to do a project about being in San Francisco for 24 hours, so that was really serendipitous. I visited twice her and her family in Portland, which was really nice. Aside from the power outage, I drove 21 hours in a blizzard to visit and there was an ice storm that took out all of the power and internet only in the 2-block radius of her family's home.
This was in Portland?
Yeah.
Wow.
And no one knew what to do. There's 100-year-old trees falling onto houses, but only in the 2 blocks surrounding where we were staying. That was really stressful. And then I came here for the first time. I'd never been to Missoula in my life, but so I came to house sit here for this friend of a friend who I met on a tour bus a decade ago for like 2 hours. And her wife were really gracious and let me come and hang out with their cat and water their plants so much. My partner and I broke up 3 days after I got here, and so I got on internet dating with a platonic profile because I had no clue. I realized there's no way to organically meet people in the middle of winter in a global pandemic in a town I'd never been to. And I ended up meeting Lizzie, who's why we're sitting here.
Yeah, so for the record, Lizzie is my sister-in-law.
Yeah, and we became fast friends. I made it really clear to people that I had no interest in romance. And it was nice to just make deep platonic friendships with people really rapidly. And I was teaching at 3 schools and finishing my last semester of grad school while I was here. So I was sometimes on Zoom calls for like 12 hours straight with no lunch break. But I composed all of my thesis work here on walks. I reconnected. I had totally disconnected from nature when I lived in Colorado. But here, it was so easy to integrate nature with the rest of my life and to walk out my door and go on a hike for 30 minutes or for 3 hours, but not have to drive an hour each way. So I spent, the whole thesis was composed in my head or on jotted down notes in a notebook on walks here, and that felt really important. But I also was having insomnia here, where once a week I'd wake up in the middle of the night at like 2 or 3 in the morning and be up to like 6 a.m. And I tried fighting against it. I'd lay still for like the first couple times, then realized I just would use that as productive time. And one of the times I knew I had to buy an EEG, and so I bought an at-home biometrics kit. I spent that 3-hour period researching and purchasing a biometrics kit, and that became an integral part of my thesis work.
Wow.
But I left here and I finalized my thesis stuff for a week in Colorado, and I had my birthday and I performed that with my dad. And
Just for the record, what were you studying? What was your thesis on? You don't have to go. I'm sure that you can talk about it.
I
You can go
will.
in quite a bit of detail.
Yeah. I have a Master's of Fine Arts in Performance. My thesis work was a 4.5 long performance lecture where I was sitting still in meditation and giving a lecture using pre-recorded material. Also sitting still in meditation with my brainwaves producing sound, and then sitting still having a disembodied conversation with my dad. And it starts at a very acute point and gradually goes further out into universal territory. And then at a certain point, I stop using language and am curious about whether or not there's other forms of transference of whatever between people beyond language. So that's when I sit still for 3.5 hours. And then the interview with my dad starts at the universal, talking about quantum physics, and gets further and further down to the acute point of the universal need for people to decouple from the trauma inherited from their parents.
Wow, that sounds really cool.
It's
And
cool.
really intense.
It was very intense. I openly wept multiple times
Yeah.
during the performance.
Is there a way if you wanted to, would there be a way for me to direct people towards that?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
something you would want?
Yeah, I could send you a link. I feel very proud of it, and it's been a really nice way to connect with people because there's so much there. Some people have come back to me and said, you said nothing, and some other people have been like, this one point really resonated with me, and we talk about that, and yeah, I'd love to share that work. It means a lot to me.
That'd be great.
But I left Colorado the day after presenting my thesis work, and went to visit one of my best friends in Missouri. And then we went together to Chicago, and I thought I was going to be there for a whole month, but I ended up getting invited to host an artist residency in Detroit. So I went and lived in Detroit for about 2 weeks and hosted 4 artists for a day-long artist residency that I do. And then I started back this way, and I went back to Chicago and wrapped things up there. Went back to Columbia, Missouri. Went back to Colorado. And then I drove from Colorado to where we are now so I could celebrate Lizzie's birthday.
So, as we come to the present moment, my last question for you is, where would you like to see yourself in the near future?
I am loosely holding on to that answer. I love the work I do in Chicago, so I would like to be spending time doing that. I know for my own mental health, I can't endure the kind of Chicago winters. I can't do that. I have really bad anxiety and like really crippling depression when I'm not around the sun, and when it's just like gray and cold. I get really paranoid, and I don't feel any joy, and I can't keep doing 4 or 5 months of that. So, but I don't want to leave working with the students and the communities and schools and all that I really cherish being with. I'm thinking about, I'd like to be doing more artist residencies and using that as a way to engage with different places for longer durations, like a month at a time or 2 or 3. I'd like to continue exploring what it means to be hosting a nomadic residency and use that as a way to engage with different places. And that's something I've been interested in exploring, the notion of what it means to be sharing hospitality and how that's received. I've thought about maybe going to Mexico City, because I've been meeting a lot of people from Mexico City who keep saying, come to Mexico City. But I feel pretty open. Right now I've been planning in really small chunks because things have been aligning really well. And
you're kind of just riding the wave.
Yeah, if I have the privilege to be riding the wave, then I think it would be foolish to be actively denying that.
Well, thank you so much for being so open about everything. I feel like we covered a lot of ground in a very short time. And I really hope that you're able to find a way to mesh all of those aspirations that are linked to all those different places.
Thanks.
And I hope we keep in touch about it, and hopefully get to see you in Chicago later this month. And yeah, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.